This lecture is going to cover Chapter 21, which is covering the digestive system. First thing I want to do, since this is our very first one to talk about human anatomy, I kind of wanted to give you guys just some wonderful little things. First off, I'm going to like to show gory pictures as we go through here, so expect that. This was a cadaver that had been sliced transversely down the length of the body, so you could see what the body looks like in different places, basically when you cut it into top and bottom sections. After a certain point, you should be able to tell that this is a male. There's a very obvious penis that goes right through there, and that's a nice little dead giveaway that you have that. Or that's a male, I should say. But there are terms that are going to be relevant. This is basically going to be a dumbed down version of A&P. So, some stuff to get you guys used to. For the digestive system, we're not just going to be talking about humans, we will talk about some other things. So, herbivore is a term that you usually hear back in high school. Pause it if you need to get that stuff written down, but I give you examples, I give you the definition right there. Carnivores are things that eat meat. I always kind of liked this gif. So the whale throws a fish up and so he can catch a bird, which apparently is yummier than a fish, or maybe he was just tired of fish. I don't know what his story was here. But since he's eating a bird, that would make the whale a carnivore in this case. And the bird that tried to eat the fish was a carnivore also. Omnivores eat either plant or animal material, so most humans fit into the omnivore category. Bears are also in this category as well. They eat a lot of nuts and berries and flowers, but they also eat a bunch of salmon and some other meaty sort of things as well. Within the animal kingdom, there's a bunch of different ways that animals can try to get their food. One of the simpler mechanisms is what's known as suspension feeding. It's called suspension feeding because you're feeding on particles that are suspended in water, so you're eating stuff like phytoplankton or zooplankton, but things that are just floating around in the water. Whales, the largest creature on the planet today, well, largest animal on the planet today, baleen whales are actually filter feeders, so they eat the smallest things in the ocean, and yet it allows them to be the biggest things in the ocean. And one of the things I always liked about this particular whale is that they create something called a bubble net. Like if you were looking down on the ocean from a plane, what they do is they swim in a circle blowing bubbles out of their blowhole, and they gradually make the circle smaller. And they do that around a school of either plankton or krill or really small fish, and then what they'll do is a member of their party will swim up through the bubble net eating a big mouthful of whatever happened to be in that net. It's really cool if you ever get to see it in person, but of course you won't do that in this area of Texas. Substrate feeders eat what they live in. Technically, earthworms fit into this group because they're eating the dirt that they live inside. This caterpillar is not on top of or underneath this leaf. It's actually in the middle of the leaf, eating the mesophyll within the leaf, and then pooping out little leaf remnants as it goes. And so it's an example of a substrate feeder as well. Fluid feeders, they eat liquid materials. Mosquitoes go in here. Leeches are also blood feeders. If you have an animal that eats something that is liquid at all, it fits into this group. So if a person's got their jaw wired shut and they're having to eat smoothies exclusively, they would technically be considered a fluid feeder. Bulk feeders eat a lot in one sitting, so anything that eats like a whole fish at one go, that's a bulk feeder. Any of your snakes that eat whole... I've seen a snake eat a hippo in a video, and so that's a bulk feed in a nutshell. This book gives you 4 different stages to food processing. Some books kind of break some of the stuff down a little bit more, but ingestion is essentially just eat the food, put it in your mouth. Digestion has a couple of different processes. There's mechanical digestion, which physically breaks down food, and there's chemical digestion, which chemically breaks down food. After it's been broken down into small enough pieces, you can absorb your nutrients. Most of the nutrients are going to go into your capillaries, so your bloodstream, but some of them are going to go into a different pathway. Anything that can't be absorbed gets eliminated, so this is defecation or pooping if you want to call it that. This I just wanted to give you a little breakdown. So we talked about organic molecules in the very beginning of 1408, the first half of this course. I just wanted to tell you again, whenever you're eating food, you're eating macromolecules. You're eating proteins, which are made out of amino acids. You're eating polysaccharides like starch. You're eating nucleic acids, DNA and RNA, and you're eating fat like a triglyceride with a glycerol and 3 fatty acid tails. The problem is these molecules are so big you cannot absorb them as they are. You have to break them down into smaller pieces in order to be able to absorb them. So you're going to have enzymes that can help you break down proteins into amino acids. These are small enough you can absorb them. You can break polysaccharides and disaccharides down into monosaccharides like glucose. You can absorb that. You can break nucleic acids down into nucleotides, which are absorbable, and then you can break fats down into glycerol and then the fatty acid tails, which are absorbable. Even though they're still large, they're going to get absorbed into lacteals, which are part of the lymph system instead of the bloodstream. All right, so peristalsis, what is it? It's this wave of muscle contractions that pushes food through your digestive system. You can see it happening right here. So that ring of constriction is peristalsis. And if there had been food in whatever organ this is, I'm thinking that it's an esophagus because it doesn't have folds like a small intestine does. But as it pushes through here, it's going to push the food through the esophagus and send it down to the stomach down below. So that's how peristalsis works. You guys already have your definition of sphincters, but yeah, they're just doors between organs that control when something gets to pass through something and when it doesn't. So yeah, the only sphincter you guys have probably ever heard the name of is the booty hole in this nice magic school bus video. But the anus is the butthole essentially, and it is a sphincter. It's a valve because you can open it to poop, but most of the time it stays closed. Saliva is a fluid that contains a bunch of digestive enzymes. It also has some mucus in it to help lubricate your food. It's got some proteins in it that can help kill bacteria on the food that you eat. So this is everything that's in saliva, which is secreted by your salivary glands. Your oral cavity is, of course, your mouth. Ingestion happens here. It is possible to feed people through the nose through something called an NG tube. That doesn't happen normally. There are some people who have to be fed through a stomach port. Again, that's not a normal situation, though, except for those people who eat that way. There's a teeny tiny bit of digestion that happens in your mouth, but your food honestly isn't in there long enough to really break down anything, and except for mechanical digestion, that act of chewing, that is going to do a good job here in the oral cavity. Salivary glands, you have a few sets, so you've got 2 parotid glands, one on either side. You have 2 submandibular glands, one on either side, and then you have a sublingual gland that's under the tongue. All of these are going to be secreting saliva into the oral cavity. They are stimulated subconsciously from your nervous system so that anytime you're thinking about food or you smell food, you're going to produce saliva through those glands. A bolus is a rounded mass of food, so you round it and you liquefy it in the mouth. That makes it easier for you to swallow. That bolus stays as a bolus as we get through the esophagus, and then it gets mixed up in the stomach quite a bit. Next up, you guys have this picture to label. Focus more just on the names of the parts as you label it, but it does give you the function next to all of those things and just some miscellaneous stuff about it. Remember, you can pause the video so that you can get what you want labeled on here. I'm going to go ahead and skip past it. I've already given you what you guys need for the Heimlich maneuver. This is what you do for a person who's choking. They're trying to change the name from Heimlich maneuver to abdominal thrust. What you essentially need to know for this is you put your hands in a different place for the Heimlich maneuver than you do for CPR. When you do CPR, you put your hands on the sternum, which is kind of between the breasts or the pectoral muscles. When you're doing the Heimlich maneuver, though, your hand needs to be lower. It's going to be in between the belly button and then the very bottom part of the sternum or below your diaphragm. So when you put your hand right in there, what you're going to do is grab with your other hand and then pull up and back hard and fast. And when you do that, hopefully you'll dislodge whatever food the person was choking on. If you're by yourself eating and you choke, you are supposed to throw yourself over the back of a chair with enough force that you might break a rib, but it's better to break a rib than it is to choke to death because you were eating alone, and so just keep that in mind. This is just kind of a video on that how to save yourself thing. He's going to give a different method than the throw over a chair thing.
Hi, I'm Jeff Rennan, and I am a firefighter and paramedic just north of Denver, Colorado. I've also been a basic life support instructor and CPR instructor for the last 22 years as well. I've noted over those years that there is no real effective means for somebody to rescue themselves should they be choking, and nobody is there to help them. So we came up with something that actually works pretty well. Now, the maneuver you're about to see came from the years when I was a boxer back in the 80s. It was actually something my coach taught me in order to toughen up my abdominal muscles. I figured that there was a better use for it, so I applied it to my years as a paramedic. So let's take a look here. You get down onto your knees, right? This is a desperate situation. You can no longer breathe, right? So you get down onto your knees and get into a push-up position. Now keep in mind, I'm on my fist right here because I have a fused right hand from my boxing days. So actually what you want to do is get into this push-up position and let your arms go in a northward way, right? You want your arms to come out completely from underneath you, landing upon your chest and belly, just like this. I'm going to go ahead and show you the maneuver. Now if you heard that there, you could hear just how much air was moving northward here. And that should be enough to dislodge just about anything that's lodged in somebody whose airway is blocked. Now keep in mind, this probably won't work for someone who's pregnant, and it never is, nothing is 100% effective, but this is certainly a lot better than what we've been taught so far.
Okay, so that's another way that you can try to save yourself. Now notice the first thing that I tell you to do is call 911. No, you won't be able to talk if you're choking, but if you call them before you start trying to save yourself, they'll know that there's somebody that's in danger there, and they'll send cops and paramedics over to your house if you call 911. Even if you pass out then because you weren't able to breathe, hopefully they will get there in time to be able to save you. If you do manage to dislodge the food but you had called 911, they're totally okay with you saying, I had been choking, but I'm okay now. But it's better to call before you can't call anymore, and so that's why I wanted to mention that little part. Alright, gastric juice. It's all the liquid that gets produced in the stomach. It is mostly hydrochloric acid. There is a fair amount of mucus in there, and there's a digestive enzyme as well. Gastrin is a hormone that your stomach produces so that it can make more gastric juice. Chyme is that gastric juice plus food that you've eaten. If you have eaten and then thrown up and it's been chunky, what you have thrown up is chyme. Part of that chyme is an enzyme called pepsin that helps you digest proteins. The acid in the stomach actually helps to activate that pepsin so that you can break down like hamburger meat or pepperoni, or I don't know, whatever you guys have eaten recently. So pepsin does not get activated until you eat so that your stomach doesn't digest itself. It normally sits there in an inactive form. Inactive pepsin is called pepsinogen. Once it mixes with hydrochloric acid, that converts pepsinogen into pepsin so that you can actually start digesting those proteins. Here they have put this dead fish into a tub that is acid plus pepsin, and you can see over time that it decomposes the bones. If we get to go back to lab, you guys will get to make an artificial stomach. Oh wait, no, that's what you guys were supposed to do this week, so you won't get to make the artificial stomach, never mind. But one of the things that I like to chuck into that artificial stomach is just a bone that somebody gets from like a chicken wing or something, and you'll see your stomach acid is fully capable of completely dissolving a bone. That's how good the acid plus the enzymes are inside of there. So one of the problems with that acid has to do with the sphincter muscle. There's a sphincter between the esophagus and the stomach. If it's working correctly, your stomach acid stays in the stomach. If that sphincter fails, your stomach acid washes back up into the esophagus, and your esophagus can't handle that. So your stomach is made to deal with that acid level, but your esophagus isn't. And so you'll end up with the symptom of heartburn as you get literal chemical burns in your esophagus from the stomach acid that had been in there. I gave you the top part of this, but you do need to make sure you write down the treatment options for acid reflux. So antacids are bases that you eat, like Tums or whatever. What that does is it just counteracts the acidity of the stomach. These newer drugs are called proton pump inhibitors. They prevent your stomach from making the acid to begin with. They have some fairly wicked side effects, so don't take them unless your doctor has specifically told you to take them. Alright, gastric ulcers. So if something's going on in your stomach and it does start to digest itself, you end up with holes in the wall of your stomach, and those are what gastric ulcers are. Once again, you need the treatment because I've already told you what they are. So we treat with antacids so that you stop eating yourself. And because one of the problems for this is a bacteria called Helicobacter pylori, that bacteria kind of eats the mucus, and so now you don't have that mucus lining that protected you, so antibiotics can kill the bacteria so you can rebuild your mucus layer. Sometimes people do need surgery because they're bleeding a lot, and so that's an option if a person gets really bad. Small intestine is doing a lot of chemical digestion, and almost all of your nutrients get absorbed here in the small intestine. Stomach, don't know why we're going back to that at this point. I guess the book talked about them out of order, but your stomach is very expandable, so you can eat a lot of food at one time without tearing something. And then it also has all those things that we talked about earlier, the gastric juice, the pepsin, can digest bone, yada yada. The pancreas is located under or behind the stomach. It secretes several different enzymes that are going to help you digest every single major category of nutrient, but our problem is your food doesn't ever go into the pancreas. So your pancreas is going to release those enzymes into the small intestine. Your liver is going to release its contents into the small intestine as well, but right now we were just talking about pancreas. So the liver produces bile salts, and bile salts are going to help you do something called emulsification of fat. You need to remember that fats won't dissolve in water, so we have to allow it to mix in with the water, and that's what the bile does. There's a lot of people who think that a liver has a weird texture when you eat it, and part of that is the bile salts that are in there. Part of it is also some of the other nutrients that get stored in there. Liver is super healthy for a person to eat because it's got a ton of iron in it. It's got a bunch of vitamin A in it. It's a really good source of lean protein, but it does have a weird texture for people that haven't had any in a while. So bile is doing that emulsification, which again allows the fat to mix in with the water so that your enzymes will be able to digest it a little bit later on. Once the liver makes the bile, it sends it to the gallbladder, and the gallbladder is going to release the bile after you have eaten a meal that is high in fat. When the gallbladder releases it, it's going to go into the small intestine. Incidentally, both the pancreas and the gallbladder/liver share the same opening into the duodenum of the small intestine. So this is just showing you the gallbladder. One of the problems that happens is sometimes the bile salts can crystallize with cholesterol to make these little gallstones. Those gallstones then get stuck in the little teeny tiny ducts that were supposed to help take that bile down to the small intestine. If you ever get pain sort of in the upper right side of your abdomen, that can be indicative of a gallbladder problem. It can also mean that you've got a liver problem, but it's something that should get checked out. Generally speaking, if you get these stones, they're just going to surgically remove the gallbladder so that you don't end up with those getting stuck in there anymore. Duodenum is the first foot of the small intestine. This is where both the pancreas and the liver shunt their stuff. You can even see the little opening in the picture right there. That's where those two things, pancreas and liver, are going to be releasing their chemical products. Absorption allows the nutrients to go from outside of your body, because technically inside your small intestine is outside of your body, to either lacteals if it's a fat substance, or into the capillary bed if it's a carb or a protein substance. The villi are these little finger-like extensions that are part of the wall of the small intestine. They help increase the surface area of the small intestine. And like I said right here, the more surface area you have, the more nutrients you can actually absorb from your food. And so that's going to help you out. I'm not sure what this video is. Let's go see. Oh yeah. So this dude had been in a motorcycle accident. You can actually see his intestines moving around. I'm going to silence him, although he has a lovely Boston accent. But you can see his intestines moving around in there. You don't normally see it because you've got abdominal muscles or layers of fat on top of that, and so ordinarily it's hidden, but he's got a graft in place right now so you can see them. He's actually pointing to his liver right there, so you can also see the liver in that video. Alright, microvilli. If you look at the cells that line the villus, even the cells have these little folds in them. Once again, it just increases surface area, but those are microvilli, so they're folds in the plasma membrane. So what ends up happening in the small intestine is you end up with folds on folds on folds, all to increase surface area and the time and space you have to absorb more nutrients. Next up, you have pancreatic enzymes. So pancreatic amylase, if you see that right up here, what it does is it breaks starch down into disaccharides, which are two monosaccharides put together. Trypsin, you can see that right here, it breaks polypeptides down into smaller polypeptides, which means it's helping you digest proteins. Nucleases break down DNA and RNA into nucleotides. And then lipase is off over here. Once the fat has been emulsified with bile, we can actually start to digest fat down to glycerol and then fatty acids. Alright, functions for the liver. It does a whole bunch of them. These are the 4 that I am going to give you. It does make the bile salts to help you emulsify fat. It stores about 3 years worth of vitamin A for the average human being. It can process nutrients, like it can convert glucose into glycogen so that you can lower your blood sugar level. And it can detoxify harmful substances like drugs or alcohol. Your weird little factoid of the day is polar bears actually store so much vitamin A in their liver that if you were to eat it, you would die of vitamin A overdose. So they have even more vitamin A in their liver than you do in yours. Next up, large intestine is also known as the colon, so they are both the exact same thing. This is fatter than the small intestine, which is why it's called the large intestine, but it's actually shorter. It's not as long as the small intestine happens to be. Mostly the large intestine is storing waste. It is absorbing water from that waste, and very importantly, you have what's known as the microbiota inside of your colon. This is all the bacteria that you have in your colon that helps you digest food and prime your immune system and regulate your metabolism, and so that microbiota is very important for your overall health. The very bottom portion of our large intestine is called the cecum, and for us, it's just this little bitty pouch that hangs off the bottom. In other animals that rely on plant material, especially plant material that's not very nutritious like a eucalyptus tree, they have to ferment their food. This is called hind-gut fermentation. So their cecum is very, very, very long to help them ferment their food and get more nutrients out of it. So there's a difference between an herbivore's intestines and our intestines. There are some people out there that think that humans were meant to be herbivores. Our digestive system says no, we weren't. I'm not saying you should not be an herbivore. If you want to be a vegan, but I'm just saying really our intestines weren't meant to do that. But because we do cook our food, we still get plenty of nutrition even if we are vegans. Appendix is mostly something you hear about getting inflamed and needing to be removed. It does have a lot of bacteria in there that can reseed after you take antibiotics so that you can restore your normal flora back after you have taken them. But aside from that, you really only ever hear about it in relation to, it got inflamed and they removed it, or it got inflamed and it burst and so died because of that. Feces is, of course, poo. This is the components to that poo. Poo can tell a doctor a lot about what's going on for you. Like, do you have diarrhea? Do you have constipation? Do you have some major problems going on in your life? Or did you eat chalk recently or bone recently? So this just kind of shows you what's going on with your feces. Ideally, your poo should be like this right here. This means you're leaning towards constipation. This is a little bit better than that, but constipation increases your risk of colon cancer and hemorrhoids, and so it's not something you want to have for an extended period of time. Ruminants are animals that, instead of being that hindgut fermenter with the really large cecum like the koala bear, instead they expand their esophagus, and their esophagus has multiple chambers to ferment their food before you get to the stomach. So these are your cud chewers like cows and giraffes and things like that. What are the 3 needs that a healthy diet satisfies? They get you the fuel that you burn to make your ATP, they get you nutrients you need to build your own tissues, and they give you essential molecules like omega fatty acids or some of the amino acids that you can't make for yourself. Metabolic rate is what you guys have next. Most people associate this with how much energy do you burn, but it's really more than that. Metabolism is the sum total of all the reactions that occur in your body, both the how fast can you burn glucose and the how fast can you replicate your DNA. Basal metabolic rate is your metabolic rate when you're not expending any energy. So like if you're sitting in a room that has a good temperature so that you're not hot or cold, you haven't eaten recently, that's your metabolic rate at that point. An essential nutrient is one that you have to have for survival, but your body cannot make for itself, which means the only way that you can get these is by having a diet that supplies you with those. It's why you're supposed to have a good balanced diet, is to make sure you're getting all the essential nutrients that you need for yourself. If you're undernourished, it means that you're not getting enough calories, and like I said, that is going to indicate that you're going to lose weight. It is different from malnourishment. You can be getting all the calories in the world, but have such a crap diet that you're not getting all the nutrients that you need to continue with your normal life. That's what malnourishment is. Like if this kid were to eat this entire plate of French fries, it would have exceeded its calorie requirement for the day, but it wouldn't be getting near enough of a lot of the B vitamins, a lot of the protein that they needed during the course of the day. They would really just be getting carbs and fats. And so that would lead to malnourishment over time. This is particularly problematic for people who are in a lower socioeconomic class because they tend to eat food that is calorie rich, but it doesn't have all the nutrients that they need for good life and well-being. Essential fatty acids, most people associate these with fish, like you're supposed to eat more salmon, but really you can get these in in oils like olive oil or canola oil. These are your omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, and you need them for things like vision and brain formation and making more cells, and they help regulate inflammation as well, so try to make sure you're getting enough of those. So amino acids, essential amino acids. There's somewhere between 8 to 10 of them depending on where you are in your life and what's going on in your diet. But these are amino acids that your body, again, can't make for itself. And they're amino acids that you need to make all of your cellular proteins. If you eat meat, no big deal. Meat is a complete protein that has all 20 of the amino acids. But if you're a vegan, you might have a little bit more difficulty trying to make sure you get all 20 of the amino acids as you eat food. What this picture is trying to show you is if you rely on grains, you're missing tryptophan and lysine that's present over here in the beans. And so any protein that you needed to make that included those two ingredients, you wouldn't be able to make those proteins. So you would end up with disease symptoms because you couldn't make those. But if you ate the beans but you skipped the corn, you'd be missing methionine, which is the start amino acid present at the beginning of every protein you have to make. So you have to eat a balanced diet. All right, vitamins, organic molecules, they help your enzymes function, minerals, inorganic elements that you can find on the periodic table. I'll just pause that and you can write it down. All right. Should you take mega doses of vitamins? No, it is very possible that you have too much of a good thing. If you remember that polar bear story from just a second ago, you can overdose on vitamin A. That's actually what's happening in this person. That's why they're yellow, is they have way too much of that. Now, you can't do that with all vitamins. Some of your water-soluble vitamins, if you do consume too much, you'll just pee it out. But your fat-soluble vitamins can build up to toxic levels. So get what you need, no more, no less. That's what your goal should be with a good diet. All right, just pause this and then write down what you need to get for calcium, potassium, and sodium. You can find them, their dietary sources, what you need them for, and what will happen to you if you don't get enough of those. Oh, iron was on that preceding one too. On this one, you've got iodine right here, so get what you need for iodine, including goiter. Recommended dietary allowance is how much of each nutrient you're supposed to get during the course of a day. I want to say last semester I had you guys do a food log for a little bit, but this is your RDA for, like, if you're a 19-year-old guy, you're supposed to get 3,067 calories for the course of a day. Now this is for a guy that is average height, average weight, average health, average activity levels. And so if you run 5 miles a day, you would eat more calories than that. If you sat on your butt all day, you would need fewer calories than that. But if you're average in all aspects, that's what you would be shooting for. Be able to read a nutrition label. They did modify these fairly recently, and so this is an older one, but they always tell you how many calories are in one serving and what one serving is for that. They tell you how much total fat is in there. Remember, trans fat is the bad fat that you want to avoid. Sodium is usually fairly high, especially in processed foods. Almost all of my students end up getting way more sodium in their diet than they're supposed to have, so try to keep an eye on that one. They have to break out sugars because they're usually added in fiber, but then they want you to be able to do the math to figure out how much starch is in a food. They're only required to give you these 2 vitamins and these 2 minerals, but they will very often tell you more, especially if that food happens to be high in those. All right. So earlier I mentioned undernourishment, not enough calories, you lose weight. Overnourishment is the exact opposite. You're getting too many calories, you will gain weight. If you continue that for an extended period of time, that can lead to obesity, which means you have a BMI that is greater than 30. Obesity means you have a much higher chance of developing type 2 diabetes or cardiovascular disease like heart attack, hypertension. You're more at risk of stroke and pulmonary edema. There's just lots of problems that go along with obesity. What are the health risks and benefits of weight loss plans? It essentially goes back to almost all of them tell you to cut something out of your diet. If you cut carbs out, that means your diet's going to have more fat in it than it's supposed to. So now we have that cardiovascular link. If they take fat out, they usually add more carbs to it. Having too much of a carb is not necessarily a bad thing, but if it's sugar, it is problematic. So you just kind of need to watch what you're eating and try to get a little bit of everything. There's your little blurb on low-carb diets. More recently, it's been keto, but there's been versions of a low-carb diet for a very long time. Again, the problem with them is when they take the carb out, it tastes like crap, and so they add fat into it to make it taste better. The fat is not okay when you eat an excessive amount of that. Low-fat diet's exact opposite. They add sugar to make it taste better. That increases your risk of diabetes and insulin resistance. Gastric bypass, you've got all the blurbs that you need for that. I just kind of wanted to show you a picture. Most of the stomach and then the duodenum of the small intestine get removed from your alimentary canal, your GI tract, during a gastric bypass. So not only can you not eat a big meal because you've lost the expandability of the stomach, but you've just lost your bile salts and your pancreatic enzyme, so you're not going to digest your nutrients the same way. So you're going to have a malabsorption issue that goes along with this. LDLs and HDLs are about your cholesterol levels. You want to have a high HDL and a low LDL. You can the A&P textbook gives you a stupid memory trick, and that is the LDL stands for lousy. It doesn't really. It stands for low density, but lousy, you don't want LDL because it's lousy. It means you're at a higher risk of having stroke or heart attack. Dietary guidelines for reducing cancer risk. These are the things that you need to write in there. From here, I am going to upload a coloring quiz for you guys. You will color it and then re-upload it back in a Schoology or email it to me.